So, shall we start? Our mistake is that in trying. He has told us that when we are in the mental consciousness and not in the spiritual consciousness, we make three mistakes. The mistake of the mind, because it is limited, it makes three mistakes. So, he is going to tell us one by one what those are. Okay, so have we read this para or do we have to read it?
We didn't read.
it.
Okay, then we read
Yeah,
it.
you have to read it.
Yeah, so one of you read it. Our mistake is.
Shall I read?
Yes.
Our mistake is that in trying to define the indefiable, we think we have succeeded when we have described by an all-exclusive negation this absolute which we are yet compelled to conceive of as a supreme positive and the cause of all positives. It is not surprising that so many acute thinkers, with their eye on the fact of being and not on verbal distinctions, should be driven to infer that the absolute is a fiction of the intelligence, an idea born of words and verbal dialectics, a zero non-existent, and to conclude that an eternal becoming is the only truth of our existence. The ancient sages spoke indeed of Brahman negatively. They said of it, neti neti. It is not this, it is not that, but they took care also to speak of it positively. They said of the truth, it is this, it is this, it is that, it is all. For they saw that to limit it either by positive or negative definitions was to fall away from its truth. Brahman, they said, is the matter, is life, is mind, is supermind, is cosmic delight, is Sachidananda, yet it cannot really be defined by any of these things, not even by our largest conception of Sachidananda. In the world, as we see it, for our mental consciousness, however high we carry it, we find that to every positive there is a negative. But the negative is not a zero indeed. Whatever appears to us as zero is packed with force teeming with power of existence, full of actual or potential contents. And neither does the existence of the negative make it corresponding positive, nor non-existent or an unreality. It only makes the positive an incomplete statement of the truth of things. And even we may say of the positive's own truth, for the positive and the negative exist not only side by side, but in relation to each other, and by each other they complete and would to would to the all view which a limited mind cannot reach, explain one another. Each by itself is not really known. We only begin to know it in its deeper truth when we can read into it the suggestions of its apparent opposite. It is through such a profound Catholic institution, and not by exclusive logical oppositions, that our intelligence ought to approach the absolute.
Yeah. So again, it's a basic idea he is repeating in different words. He is saying that we must not think that the divine is only positive things. Okay, he is omnipotent, he is omniscient, he is omnipresent. He can also be the opposite, and this is impossible for the mind to think. How can God be evil? How can God be limited? How can God be weak? It's not possible. So that's why you have to go to the next level of consciousness to be able to understand that. That's basically what he's establishing here. So the mistake of the mind is to limit itself to its own being. But the mind must understand that I can have access only to so much knowledge. To get more than that, I have to go to another level. Okay, that is what he's basically saying in this paragraph. So I'll do one thing. I'll read out the summary and then we'll go back to each one and we'll see what he's saying. Okay, so now the restriction of the absolute by the mental logic to only the positives is a serious error. Okay? Only God is good, God is great. It's a serious error. Our ancient seers did indeed describe the absolute as neti neti. It is not this, it is not that. Okay, they did say that he is not this, he is not that. But they also said the opposite. That's the whole point. But they also took care to say that it is this, it is that. In other words, the absolute is beyond all relatives and it is not incapable of including them if it so wishes. If it wishes, the divine, the absolute. Okay, we are. I won't use the word divine because we are in philosophy, not in yoga. So, if we are in yoga, we can say divine. But if you are in philosophy, you have to say you have to say the absolute. So the absolute is not only omnipotent; it can also be the absolute is the opposite of omnipotent. Weak and small. Okay. Now, the absolute, if you limit him only to omnipotence, then you are limiting him. So how can you limit the absolute? You can't. The absolute may be featureless and immutable, but it is not a negative zero. It's a positive zero, containing everything in seed form. We have given many examples of this. All the examples are not perfect, but still one can understand. The water behind the dam, which is absolutely static, pure, infinite. Let's think of that. And when you look at it, it is so pure and transparent that you feel, there is nothing there. But actually, everything is there in it. It has all the power, but which is held back. The another example also is not a very good example, but still, when you are running a 100-meter race, there are 8 lanes. Most stadiums have 8 lanes, and everybody, when the starter says, "On your marks," okay, everybody gets down and crouches down and becomes absolutely immobile, concentrated. So you can't say that they are without energy. They are full of energy, waiting to unleash their energy. So this is the divine negative, so-called negative. That's what said the point. The absolute may be featureless and immutable, but it is not a negative zero. It's a positive zero, containing everything in seed form. Okay? Actually, in the world, we see that to every positive, there is a negative. And wisdom makes us see that both coexist and are interdependent, not contrary. To love, there is hate. To kindness, there is cruelty. Okay, to white, there is black. Everything is there in this. These are the dualities. Okay, so you do not think that they are opposites. They are only both coexistent and dependent on each other. There cannot be any black if there is no white. Okay, there cannot be any cruelty if there is no kindness. They are all interrelated. Both will disappear. Okay? That's exactly what happens when you go to the spiritual level of consciousness. You make your mind silent and go up. Both sin and virtue disappear. There is no more morality for you at the higher level. Okay? There's only the force that expresses both. There, and if you want to understand the force, again we come back to that idea of the breeze. Okay, the gentle breeze. The breeze is the only reality. But the breeze can be very soft and sweet. It can also be very violent and a storm. They are not opposites. They are both breeze in different quantities. That's exactly what we're saying here. To us in the mental world, we think of them as contraries, but they are not contraries. They are complements. Actually, in the world, we see that to every positive, there is a negative, and wisdom makes us see that both coexist and are interdependent, not contraries. Neither is unreal and non-existent if we are stationed in one of them. The complete truth includes both spirit and matter, one and many, silence and movement, immutable and mutable. They are all there together. That's what he's saying. So we have read the summary. Now we can go back to the beginning of the para. We'll see what the language is. Okay. So, our mistake. So I'm reading each sentence, and if it is clear, because it's important to understand also some of those words. Because if you do that, then we don't need any. Afterward, we can understand. Oh, this is what he means. Okay. So to understand Sri Aurobindo, very important to understand his language. Our mistake is that in trying to define the indefinable, We think we have succeeded when we have described by all-exclusive negation this absolute which we are yet compelled to conceive of as a supreme positive and the cause of all positives. The divine can only be positive. He can't be the opposite. That's what the mind thinks. In fact, to such an extent that there are so many philosophies which say exactly that. The divine is not responsible for all the cruelty, all the negative things here. Not possible. It's the devil who has created. If that is your philosophy, then the divine is only creator of half the universe. So you are limiting him. It's the Advaita philosophy which has the courage and the daring to say that no, it is everything. Okay. And then it explains how it is. They are complementary. So it is not surprising. I am continuing to read the next sentence. It is not surprising that so many acute thinkers, okay, acute thinkers, with their eye on the facts of being and not on verbal distinctions, should be driven to infer is to come to the conclusion that the absolute is a fiction of the intelligence, an idea born of words and verbal dialectics, a zero, non-existent, and to conclude that an eternal becoming is the only truth of our existence. He is talking about so many philosophies which say that the ultimate reality is zero and nirvana. Okay. So it is not surprising that so many acute thinkers, Buddha, Shankara, they all say that the reality is up there, not here. Okay. And to conclude that an eternal becoming is the only truth of our existence. The ancient sages spoke indeed of Brahman negatively. They did say, it is this, it is not this. They said of it, neti, neti, na iti, na iti. It is not this, it is not that. But they took care to also speak of it as positively. They said of it too, it is this, it is that, it is all. For they saw that to limit it either by positive or negative definitions was to fall away from this truth. Brahman, they said, is matter, is life, is mind, is supermind, is cosmic delight, is Satchidananda, it is everything. Yet, it cannot really be defined by any of these things, not even by our largest conception of Satchidananda. In the world as we see it, for our mental consciousness, however high we carry it, we find that to every positive there is a negative. And the negative is not a zero. Indeed, whatever appears to us as zero is packed with force, teeming with power of existence, full of actual or potential contents. When you make your mind silent, it becomes a tremendous tool for knowledge. Okay? It's not an emptiness. Indeed, whatever appears to us as zero is packed with force, teeming with power of existence, full of actual or potential contents. Neither does the existence of the negative make its corresponding positive non-existent or an unreality. Both are there, both are realities. It only makes the positive an incomplete statement of the truth of things, and even, we may say, of the positive's own truth. Look at that. He's saying that the negative proves that the positive is real. That's what he's saying. For the positive and the negative exist not only side by side, but in relation to each other and by each other. So note that there is an interconnectedness. In the synthesis we have seen that when you are in the cosmic consciousness, you see that everything is connected. Okay? The ego thinks that it is not connected, it is independent, but it is not like that. Everything in the physical world is connected. Each thing is connected to the other. At the physical level, at the vital level, and at the mental level. The connection for two bodies, okay, we are 4 or 5 of us on this in this meeting, and all our bodies are separate, but the matter is common to all. Exactly in the same way, Our vital also all separate vitals. What your vital feels, I may not feel that. But what is common is the vitality, the energy that is common. And we don't see that at the mental level, but we see that at the spiritual level. Go to the next one, you will see that commonness. That's what is pointing out. Okay, so neither does the existence of the negative make its corresponding positive non-existent or an unreality. It only makes the positive an incomplete statement of the truth of things. And even we may say of the positive's own truth. That's an interesting statement. One proves the other. For the positive and the negative exist not only side by side, but in relation to each other and by each other. They complete and would, to the all view, which a limited mind cannot reach, explain one another. Truth explains falsehood, falsehood explains truth. Each by itself is not really known. We only begin to know it in its deeper truth when we can read into it the suggestions of its apparent opposite. Is it not true that even at our level, okay, when I think of the infinite, I think of the finite, or rather it's more likely for us to think of the finite, okay, but I can think of the infinite. Then when I think of falsehood, I am repelled by it, okay, I don't want it. So our imagination, the mind, goes to a place where there is no falsehood. So naturally the mind is thinking that both are there, but they are opposites. That's at a mental level they become opposite. But if you go to the spiritual level, even at the mental level they are connected. You can't think of virtue without sin. When you see sin, you think of virtue. It's not at the animal level, it's at the mental level. The animal has no idea of sin. Okay. Even that statement is not very correct, because sometimes a dog or a cat knows that what it has done is wrong. Okay, it's very interesting. I remember I was in Madurai once, and we were invited to a dinner by that famous family of Arvind Rai Hospital, and there was a dog there, and the dog had been forbidden to come inside when the guests are there. But that dog did come in, and the Chitra, I think her name was Chitra, some of you may know her, she scolded the dog. Hey, Elsa, what are you doing? And that dog knew that it is doing wrong. It put its tail in between its legs and it put its head down and still came inside, because it knew that it will be tolerated. So even the dogs know sometimes what is right and wrong. So I can't say that it's only at the mental level. The beginnings of that is there. It's a very interesting thing. There was once a person who was very fond of cats, and that cat used to come and lie down on the chest of one of my friends. Okay, and it was so close to that person. And one day that cat wanted to show that what a great hunter I am. It had caught a sparrow. Okay, and it brought that sparrow in its mouth to show to this person. Okay, look what I have done. And when that person saw that the sparrow was killed, she felt very repulsed, and she scolded the cat and said, "Go away, don't do this." And the cat immediately went away, knowing that it was doing something which was not liked. So it's interesting that some sort of idea of good and bad also is there in the animals. Not absolutely true that they don't know. But of course it becomes much sharper in the human mind. Okay? So I go back to Sindhu's text. For the positive and the negative exist not only side by side, but in relation to each other and by each other. They complete and would to the all view. Which is the all view? When you are in the spiritual place of consciousness, there is a relative all view. You see all, everything. You don't exclude anything. Which a limited mind cannot reach, explain one another. Would explain one another. Each by itself is not really known. This is a very interesting thing. I'll come to it. Each by itself is not really known. We only begin to know it in its deeper truth when we can read into it the suggestion of its apparent opposite. You have to always, this sentence is very interesting because it is linked very much to the Jain philosophy. In the Jain philosophy, they say that nothing in the physical world can be known really. And they give this example. They say, take anything, okay? Take a book. You can say it is full of pages, it has got printed pages, it weighs this much, it is its size, okay? You can go on, it is blue color, it is this, it is that, you can go on. But you will never be able to exhaust all its capacity, all its features. And again, after you have finished, suppose even theoretically you have described everything that it is positively, now you have to start negatively. It is not red, it is not made of iron, it is not this, it is not that. So, in other words, negatively and positively, you can never exhaust the features of any one thing, even limited. So, you can't really know anything at the mental level. You have to go to the supreme level to be able to see the, so they use the word all view. You get the all view, not in the mental world, but in the higher planes of consciousness. And note interestingly that even in the higher planes of consciousness, this all view is relative. Even there it is all view is relative. Okay, so each by itself is not really known. We only begin to know it in its deeper truth when we can read into it the suggestions of its apparent opposite. You have to always see them together. It is through such a profounder Catholic intuition and not by exclusive logical oppositions that our intelligence ought to approach the absolute. Okay? Even at the mental level, theoretically, even if we don't see the all view, we can accept theoretically and have faith that yes, the dualities are valid, both are valid. Darkness and light are valid, okay? Goodness and badness are valid, we have to think of it that. And they are only opposite. They are not opposite, they are connected principles of each other. Okay, so now we can go to the next paragraph. The positives of the absolute. All this discussion, why? Because the chapter is the individual and the eternal, the infinite and the finite. Okay.
What is the exact meaning of the word Catholic?
Oh, yeah, it nothing to do with religion. It means wide-minded, okay? Not narrow, not sectarian. You have a wide view and you accommodate every view and try to see the reality and the meaningfulness of what the other person is saying. That's a Catholic. Some people, I think, pronounce it Catholic, but nowadays pronunciation is a huge issue all over the world because English has become common to the whole world. And even the pronunciations differ. No? In English, they will say God, and in America, they will say God. It's very interesting. In Australia, they'll say something else. Okay? We have the months January, February, March, April, May. Okay? In America and in England, they will say May. But in Australia, they'll say Mai. There's a very interesting joke about that. Okay, I think I've told you once. Our cricketer, okay, the famous bowler and all-rounder, okay, he had gone to Australia.
Kapil Dev.
Kapil Dev, that's right. And when he went there, he was interviewed. When he got off the plane, the correspondents, newspaper correspondents came and asked him, "You have come here to die?" That means, have you come here today? Okay. So he said, "No, I have not come here to die. I have come here to play cricket." So that's how they pronounce everything. Pronunciation goes on changing. Okay. So we read the next one. We have got time. It's only 8:15, so we can read the next one. The positives of absolute.
The positives of the absolute are its various statements of itself to our consciousness. Its negatives bring in the rest of its absolute positivity, by which its limitation to these first statements is denied. We have, to begin with, its large primary relations, such as the infinite and the finite, the conditioned and unconditioned, the qualitied and unqualitied. In each pair, the negative conceals the whole power of the corresponding positive which is contained in it and emerges from it. There is no real opposition. We have, in a less subtle order of truths, the transcendent and the cosmic, the universal and the individual. Here we have seen that each member of these pairs is contained in its apparent opposite. The universal particularizes itself in the individual. The individual contains in himself all the generalities of the universal. The universal consciousness finds all itself by the variations of numberless individuals, not by suppressing variations. The individual consciousness fulfills all itself when it is universalized into sympathy and identity with the cosmic, not by limiting itself in the ego. So too, the cosmic contains in all itself and in each thing in it the complete immanence of the transcendent. It maintains itself as the world being by the consciousness of its own transcendent reality. It finds itself in each individual being by the realization of the divine and transcendent in that being and in all existence. The transcendent contains, manifests, constitutes the cosmos, and by manifesting, it manifests or discovers, as we may say in the old poetic sense of that word, its own infinite harmonic varieties. But even in the lower orders of the relative, we find this play of negative and positive, and through the divine reconciliation of its terms, not by excising them or carrying their opposition to the bitter end, we have to arrive at the absolute. For there, in the absolute, all this relativity, all this varying rhythmic self statement of the absolute finds not its complete denial, but its reason for existence and its justification. Not its conviction as a lie, but the source and principle of its truth. Cosmos and individual go back to something in the absolute, which is the true truth of individuality, the true truth of cosmic being, and not their denial and conviction of their falsity. The absolute is not a skeptical logician denying the truth of all his own statements and self expressions, but an existence so utterly and so infinitely positive that no finite positive can be formulated which can exhaust it or bind it down to its definition.
So he is expanding on the idea, and he is giving the chapter is the eternal and the individual. He has been telling so many things, and he is explaining that they are not opposites. The cosmos contains all the individuals, and all the individuals, each individual contains a cosmos. If that is not there, then how can the cosmic consciousness be possible in spiritual experience? You can become the cosmos by just expanding your consciousness. Okay? So this is what he's saying basically. So there is no contradiction between the individual and the universal or the eternal. That's basically what. And there are so many examples in the physical world also where we understand this very quite easily. We can understand. The individual is a condensation, is a zipping off. Zipping, if you want to use a computer language, it is zipped. You zip a file and make it condensed. So it occupies much less space. So you zip the cosmic and it becomes the individual. So in the individual, everything is there. In the physical world, you have the example of the seed. The seed is a zipped tree. Everything in the tree, which occupies a huge amount of space. Look at a banyan tree, okay? It occupies a huge amount of space. Or one of those redwood trees in California. They last for 400 years and go high up and so much. And yet it can be contained in a small seed. Or you think of it as a grain of salt, okay? That grain of salt, small thing, you put it into water and it becomes, the water everywhere becomes full of that salt. So this is the infinite and the finite, and they are contained in each other. We come back to that famous 4 lines of Blake, William Blake, who was there in the 14th, 15th century. He was a painter and a poet in England. Okay? Wonderful. He was he had the experience, and these 4 lines are there. Auguries of Innocence in the poem, in which he says, hey, to see a world in a grain of sand. We have said that many times. To see a world in a grain of sand, okay, and heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. This is also true in many, many cultures also. We have also the idea in India also, we have the idea that 1 second of time can contain a whole age, okay, a whole eon, okay, that also is there. And there are some very interesting stories also about that. Okay, so what is to us a very long time, for the divine it's a very short time. And what is to us very short time can actually be for him something else. But there it is a condensed form, and here it's the expanded form. Cosmos is infinite, but the transcendent holds all this in itself. So we have 3 levels: the transcendent, the cosmic, and the individual. The individual is the smallest and most concentrated, and when it expands, it can become the cosmos, and the cosmos also is again absorbed into the transcendent. So this is what he's saying. Okay. And this truth is not possible to understand by the mind. That's basically what he's saying. So we can do 2 things. I can read out the summary and we'll go to each sentence again. I'm reading out the summary, which I had done earlier. Okay. So don't find it, you won't find it in the text. Just you have to listen. The positives of the absolute are the assertions we make to ourselves to describe it. And what are the positives? Omnipotence, omniscience, infinity, etc. The negatives are not the contraries. They are the denial. Just 1 second. Yeah. They are the 1 second. Not the contrary. They are the denial of the limitation of the absolute to only its positives. Weakness, ignorance, finite limitations are the negatives, so-called negatives, which the absolute is capable of. Okay? The large primaries, infinite and finite, saguna and nirguna, manifested and unmanifested, are the pairs in which each pole involves and contains the other. The infinite can crystallize itself and into the infinitesimal. Knowledge can metamorphose itself into ignorance. The one can contain the many. The individual can universalize his consciousness, and the universe finds itself in each individual. The absolute does not deny the relative. It does not imprison itself in its positives. It can issue out of itself these apparent negatives. This is what he's saying. Then we can now go back to the beginning of the para and see the language. This is the basic. The idea is not very difficult to understand. It's very easy. The positives of the absolute are its various statements to ourselves of our consciousness. Its negatives bring in the rest of its absolute positivity, by which its limitations to these first statements is denied. We say that the divine is infinite, that's a positive. And then we say the divine can also be the infinitesimal. Okay? It only confirms the positive. It's not an opposite, it confirms the positive. The negatives bring in the rest of its absolute positivity, by which limitation to these first statements is denied. The first statements are positives. We have to begin with its large primary relations, such as the infinite and the finite, the conditioned and the unconditioned, the qualitied and the unqualitied. And in each pair, the negative conceals the whole power of the corresponding positive, which is contained in it and emerges from it. There is no real opposition. We have in a simply saying there's no real opposition. Why? Because there's an apparent opposition. When we are in the normal mental consciousness, there's an opposition, and it is valid for you. Okay, that's you have to realize that. But real opposition is not there. As you go higher and higher in consciousness, the reality becomes more and more absolute. We have, in a less subtle order of truths, the transcendent and the cosmic. It is less subtle. That means it is very concrete. Okay? Not the words he is putting in such a way. We have in a less subtle order of truths. In other words, in the physical world, when we say truth and falsehood are connected, it's a very subtle connection. Okay? Because you have to really think of it. They seem to be opposite, but there is subtle connection. But when you go higher up, this subtlety starts disappearing. It becomes more and more obvious and more concrete. That's why he's saying we have, in a less subtle order of truths, as we climb up in consciousness, the transcendent and the cosmic, the universal and the individual. Here we have seen that each member of these pairs is contained in its apparent opposite. That's why it is concrete. It's no more subtle. Okay? The universal particularizes itself in the individual. The individual contains in himself all the generalities of the universal. The universal consciousness finds all itself by the variations of numberless individuals, not by suppressing variations. The individual consciousness fulfills all itself when it is universalized into sympathy and identity with the cosmic, not by limiting itself in the ego. When you get rid of your ego and go to the higher level of consciousness, you cosmicize yourself. Everything becomes either part of you or you are part of everybody else. Okay? We have discussed that many times. So too, the cosmic contains in itself. So too the cosmic contains in all itself, and in each thing, in it, the complete immanence of the transcendent. Let me read that sentence again. So too the cosmic contains in all itself and in each thing. It includes it collectively and individually. That's what it means. In all itself and in each thing in it, the complete immanence of the transcendent. Everything is there in seed form. It maintains itself as a world being by the consciousness of its own transcendent reality. It finds itself in each individual being by the realization of the divine and transcendent in that being and in all existences. The transcendent contains, manifests, constitutes the cosmos, and by manifesting it, manifests or discovers, as we may say in the old poetic sense of that word, its own infinite harmonic varieties. Note the three things. He keeps repeating this idea in many places. First of all, the transcendent contains, then it manifests, and then it constitutes the universe. Okay? So it's like a man, when he conceives of something, he first of all it contains. The idea is there in seed form in the head. Then he starts manifesting it. Okay? And then finally he constitutes the cosmos. So he's like an architect who has a plan in his mind and he puts it down on paper. It manifests itself on paper, and finally it manifests itself in the physical world. It becomes a building. So exactly in the same way, he's saying this. This idea he keeps on repeating many places. In other words, the divine is in control of all that it is creating. It is not out of control. That's what it means. The transcendent contains, number one, manifests, number two, constitutes the cosmos, and by manifesting it, manifests or discovers, as we may say in the old poetic sense of the word, its own infinite harmonic varieties. When it manifests itself, it discovers that, oh, all these are possibilities within me. Okay. Discovers, he said, okay. The divine does not discover, but the human being, when he does that, he discovers. No? So that's what he's using the word discover in a very, it definitely does not apply to the divine, but it applies to the individual when he's discovering his own divinity. But even in the lower orders of the relative, okay, not the plural, okay, the lower orders, because there are so many lower orders. The overmind is a lower order of the supermind, the intuition is a lower order of the supermind, the element mind is, the higher mind is, these are all lower orders, all the planes of the relative. We find this play of negative and positive, and through the divine reconciliation of its terms, not by excising them, not by cutting out, not by exclusion, like the ascetic is doing. He is cutting out the whole universe. Not by excising them or carrying their opposition to the bitter end. Which is the bitter end? You reject the physical world. That's a bitter end. Okay. And we have to arrive at the absolute. For there in the absolute. By the way, why is it bitter? Because when the ascetic is rejecting the physical world, he is throwing away the possibility of power and ananda. Srila wants power and ananda both, which are available here. When you go into the absolute silence, you are enjoying the absolute infinity and freedom and silence. But you may not be enjoying the ananda and the power, which is available in the physical world. That's why he's using the word bitter, bitter end. We have to arrive at the varying rhythmic self-statement of the absolute. Finds. Okay. Let me read the sentence again. For there in the absolute, all this relativity, all this varying rhythmic self-statement of the absolute finds not its complete denial, but its reason for existence and its justification. Not its conviction as a lie, but the source and principle of a truth. In falsehood, we see the need of truth. In cruelty, we see the need of gentleness. Okay. And also in the physical world, is it not true that when you see falsehood, there is something in the human mind that says, no, this is repulsive. I want the opposite. So there's a connection in them, even in the mental world, there's a connection between the two. Okay? And that is its justification. The justification of falsehood and all the negatives in the physical world are those principles which goad you, which pull you, which impel you to go upwards. That's why it's justified. Okay? If those things were not there, you would be quite content to remain where you are. If there is no falsehood, you would not even know the truth and you would be content. But when the opposite is there, it is goading you and pushing you, encouraging you to go to the opposite. Okay? For there in the absolute, all this relativity, all this varying rhythmic self-statement of the absolute finds not its complete denial, but its reason for existence and its justification. Justification. All the negatives find their justification. Not its conviction as a lie, but the source and principle of its truth. Okay. As he says in synthesis also, he has said, if you remember, truth and error are companions, they are handmaidens. Error is a handmaiden of truth. Only when you make a mistake, you know what the truth is. So there is a connection between the two. They are not opposites. Okay. Not in but the reason for existence is justification. Not its conviction as a lie, but the source and principle of its truth. Cosmos and individual go back to something in the absolute, which is the true truth of individuality. Those who don't understand this, they say, what is this nonsense? True truth. Because truth also is graded. Something is true at the physical level, something is more true at the next level, and it becomes most true at the highest level. So there is true truth of individuality, the true truth of cosmic being, and not their denial and conviction of their falsehood. So Sanjay is not being exclusive, he is being inclusive in his philosophy. The absolute is not a skeptical logician denying the truth of all his own statements and self-expressions, but an existence so utterly and so infinitely positive that no finite positive can be formulated which can exhaust it and bind it down to its definitions. So we have finished the para and it is also time, 8:35. So we stop here today, and if there are any, I think it's very clear what you said, no? So there are hardly any questions arise. But if you have any question, we can discuss it for a short while. Otherwise, we stop. Okay? So, Archana Di, Smriti, Yasmin, Shilpa, au revoir, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Ragata.
Okay.